Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa man tabi'ahum bi ihsanin ila yawm bid-din. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. All right, let's look at the poem here, Manẓūmat al-Ādāb, al-Ṣughrā. This is Ibn Abdul Qawi al-Mardawi. Of course, we've been looking at this. Pick up where we left off. We'll just jump back a line or two. Okay, last time we were together talking about this. An-Nāḍim rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, وَإِنْ جَهَرَ الذِّمِّيُّ بِالْمُنْكَرَاتِ فِي الشَّرِيعَةِ يُزْجَرُ دُونَ مُخْفٍ بِمَرْكَدِ وبالأسهل ابدأوا ثم زد قدر حاجة فإن لم يزل بالنافذ الأمر فاصددي إذا لم يخف في ذلك الأمر حيفه إذا كان ذا الإنكار حتم التأكد ولا غرم في دف السنوج كسرته ولا سور أيضا ولا آلة الددي وآلة التنجيم والسحر ونحوه وكتب حوت هذا وأشباهه اقتدي وبيض وجوز للقمار بقدر ما يزيل عن المنكور مقصد مفسد ولا شق زق الخمر أو كسر دنه إذا عجز الإنكار دون التقدد وإن يتأتى دونه رفع منكر ضمنت الذي ينقى بالتغسيله قدي. All right, that's what we're going to look at this evening. Of course, the English rendering says, a dhimmi committing what the law deems immoral is restrained in public while in private not opposed. Begin with what is easy, then increase as needed. If not removed, then by ruling order to be closed. If he fears no injustice in raising the issue, and the objection is clearly required and sound, no penalty falls for smashing tambourines, nor images, nor instruments of folly when found, nor the tools of astrology, spells and such, tear the books that teach it and all of its kind, nor eggs nor nuts used for gambling play that removes the evil from a corrupter's design, nor tearing the wineskin or smashing its jug, if rebuking is impossible without a damaging blow, but if without it the evil could be removed, what is purified through washing is all that you owe. All right, so we're still on the topic of al-amr bil-ma'ruf wa nahy al-munkar. Okay, and our initial session, which was the previous one, gave us some foundations. And now, with these lines, we're going to talk about some manners of enjoining the good and forbidding the evil. And then we're going to talk about some specific rulings, which will provide for us some principles. Most of this will be theoretical, but there will be times when application is possible, okay, in our given circumstances and society. So the first line that we're looking at this evening is وَبِالْأَسْهَلِ ابْدَأُ ثُمَّ زِدْ قَدْرَ حَاجَةٍ فَإِنْ لَمْ يَزُلْ بِالنَّافِذِ الْأَمْرِ فَاصْدُدِ. Okay, so begin with what is easy, then increase as needed. If not removed, then by ruling order to be closed. So here, when we're beginning, as is the commanded here, he says وَبِالْأَسْهَلِ ابْدَأ. So ibda, to begin, basically commanding the one who's going to be enjoining the good and forbidding the evil to begin with what is easiest, meaning here what is gentle. The gentlest possible form for you to enjoin the good and forbid the evil is where you begin. All right, so you start off soft, as opposed to jumping right to harshness and a sternness. And essentially, by beginning with the easiest possible way, the softest, most gentle form, you will attain the virtue of your action and be in accordance with the Prophet's model of gentle character. The Prophet ﷺ, of course, was known for having a very soft character, welcoming, easygoing, was displayed and exercised goodwill towards people, liked to make things easy and not to burden people. He had this type of disposition. And this is typically how you get further with people. They'll be more responsive to you when you're gentle rather than harsh. When you treat them in a manner of respect as opposed to, maybe causing embarrassment or making them feel unworthy. And very well known, the Prophet ﷺ being very lenient and very soft and welcoming. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَوْ كُنْتَ فَضًّا غَلِيظَ الْقَلْبِ لَانْفَضُّوا مِنْ حَوْلِكَ. If you were hard-hearted and harsh, they would have disbanded from around you. They would have fled and left you. But the Prophet ﷺ was not that way. As I said, he was very easygoing and encouraged people to be gentle and to be soft. And then you can escalate as needed. Okay? So, it's obligatory for us to enjoin the good and forbid the evil, which we've discussed previously. And that should be done by beginning with gentleness and a soft approach right off the bat, whether the person is Muslim or otherwise. Right? So you treat your brother the way you want to be treated, and you also want to be treated kindly, but that also extends to anyone else outside of the faith, such as a dhimmi. So we just left the topic of the dhimmi. The dhimmi is the one who's the Christian Jew or what do they call them? Zoroastrian. That have engaged in a contract with the Muslim state. Those are the dhimmi, right? And they're now living in the Muslim lands, following the law, and by doing so, and then of course they're paying a form of a tax, if you will, the jizya, to be there and also to enjoy the benefits of the state, like its protection, its the various services that are offered. So they're there, and part of our job is to, as the Muslim community, as a member of the community, is to enjoin the good and forbid the evil. Essentially, we're all helping one another. We could call it like the religious policing each other, or morally policing one another to try and keep the society elevated, okay, as opposed to letting it degrade into typically what you might find today, where everyone's just doing as they want, however they feel, doesn't matter what the situation is, it's just, I'm living my life, I'm being me, accept me as I am. It's self-love, it's self-lust, it's all the self stuff. It's me. Don't judge me, only God. All that stuff, like, listen, wrong society, wrong approach to life. We need help. We all need help. We need encouragement. And that's the concept here. So we begin with what's easiest. Stated in al-Ādāb, the one who enjoins good and forbids evil should be humble and gentle in his call, compassionate and kind, not harsh or hard-hearted, not rigid and overbearing. Also, from the qualities of the person engaged in enjoining the good and forbidding the evil, is they should be religious themselves. They should be pure, they should be chaste, they should have sound judgment, they should be resolute and firm in upholding the religion themselves. And this was kind of hinted at by the author al-Ādāb when he said regarding the strong young man, or the firm, resolute hand of the young man. It's some strength, there's some, they're solid in their faith, they're not easily shaken, nor are they misled. The aim should be, of course, while doing this, to seek the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? This is not to be done to show off. It's not to be done for flattery. It's not to be done in terms of having some type of competition between other people, or boasting or bragging about your role in the community. This is something that has to be done sincerely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for the purposes of fulfilling the command, meaning the obligation to revive the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and to support and secure the sacred law of Allah. Those are the goals with that necessary intention involved. And so the coupled manner that we're looking at. So we got kind of a more well-rounded approach to understanding this. There's the intention, there's the goal, and there's the modality, the how we're going to go about doing it. And then there's the qualities of the one that's actually engaging. It's also recommended for the one engaged in this to practice voluntary acts of devotion, to maintain gentleness, to be cheerful when interacting with people, to have a smiling face, welcoming to people, to display good character when you're correcting other people's mistakes. You also have to be patient, and you have to be tolerant for initial slip-ups. And of course, you want to be certain of what it is that you're doing and addressing, so you need to confirm the facts. We've talked about that previously. Okay, so this initial piece about being tolerant and patient with people, especially when they're coming off of a habit, trying to undo a habit of sinful behavior. It's a rarity that it only takes one time for somebody. It only takes a reminder or a clear instruction or a warning of sorts, and then they totally just disengage what they're doing and now come into alignment with the Sharia. We all struggle with things, and each of us have different areas in our lives that we struggle with. Some are stronger in certain areas than they are in other areas. And so something that we find to be easy might be for the other person rather difficult for them to adhere to. You might find a certain thing more challenging than we do. And we have to recognize and be compassionate with people when it comes to dealing with any slip-ups or mistakes. Be patient with people. Give them some time. And again, I think the golden rule is to treat people the way that you want to be treated. To treat people also considering how they want to be treated. Okay? It's recommended also to have these great characteristics as was mentioned. Al-Qadi, he said, one must begin with the easiest approach. And that's the gentlest and softest method. As is mentioned by our Nadhim here, our author and poet, to begin with what's easiest, to begin with what is lenient. And one acts based on what he reasonably judges to be most effective. Okay, so this is like, there's an art to this. It's a bit of an art. As much as it is a process that there's like, certain things that you should understand and know. There's certain like principles and certain rules that you have to follow. There's also a bit of an art to it in, understanding people's emotions, being able to read people's reactions. And the more you know somebody, the more capable you're going to be of doing this, fulfilling this role for them. You're going to know, like, look, that approach doesn't work for this particular person. Right? A stranger might try to talk to somebody, like, just tell them, like, look, wait a minute. Now, I know this person, and I've tried that. It fails every time. They don't respond to that type of address. It has to be done in this way. Some people like directness. Some people like to be indirect and subtle. So there is a bit of an art here where you have to be into working with people. Those are all things that you have to consider. So just jumping in and just assuming that there's one way for everything, that's not the case. That's not going to be the case. And if you look at the life of the Prophet ﷺ, you'll find that he addressed people in different ways. He utilized different things in order to get his foot in the door with people. Addressed people in different manners. Gave advice in different ways to different people. Even among the companions, you'll find various different types of advice that he would give. They would ask for advice, and you would see, well, why is he giving so much different advice to companions? It's because what? He knew his companions. He knew what it is that they needed as individuals, so he could address them. He could kind of like really customize, if you will, what he wanted to teach a particular person, because he was intimately familiar with who they were and where they were in their development in terms of their faith. All right, then if the obligatory evil, the munkar here, is not removed through gentleness, this is when you begin to increase the intensity beyond having a soft approach by getting a little more firm in your speech to the extent needed to eliminate that evil. And if that doesn't work, then you increase the severity further through stern warnings and threats. All right, so it doesn't mean like you have to be soft all the time. You're going to be soft. Being soft is only as good as it is effective. So when softness is no longer effective, you continuing to be soft is a failure on your own part. You're not actually helping the situation now. Okay, because what's happening is essentially they're not responding to this soft approach, and you're going to be basically allowing it to continue, and it may be even enabling them to go further with this particular sin. So that's like the example would be washing a stain off of a garment. You have a very nice garment that got something on it. So you're not going to take the brush and the harsh chemicals right to it and just start ripping at it. No, you're going to be like, well, we got to just try a little water first. It'll come off easy with water. If it doesn't come off with water, let's add a little soap. Turn the temperature up a little bit. A little pressure. Start scrubbing now. And you're going to increase the intensity of how you cleanse to remove that stain based on how it works. And the same thing goes for us. We'll increase the intensity. And you'll note, this is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses us in the Quran. Through a series of both positive and negative reinforcements. There are times in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses us with gentle, very encouraging, through reward, words. And then there are times in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses us with very stern and harsh warnings. Also through the threat of punishments. I can say there's a balance here between what they consider janib al-wujud and janib al-Ādāb, which is like the positive and negative reinforcements. Okay, and that's the approach. So you start with the positive reinforcements, and then you might have to move to talking about consequences and threats and warnings. So if the evil is removed, the goal's achieved. That's what you're after, is achieving a goal. Of course, the goal being to establish the religion of Allah, to support the Sharia, to remove evil from society, to avoid people from disgracing themselves and their community, and of course to revive the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. If the evil is not removed, despite all of these various efforts and stages that you're going through, then at this point you can seek assistance of one with an effective authority. Basically, they have the power to enforce rules. And that's what the Imam gets at here when he says, nafidh al-amr. And this refers to someone whose command is carried out. Okay, so you as an individual may have that type of authority. You may have the ability to carry out, he says, فَإِن لَمْ يَزُلْ بِالنَّافِذِ الْأَمْرِ. All right, then you go to the basically executive authority. You might have the executive authority, and that would be like in your home or in your place of business, where you're the boss, you call the shots, you have control over the resources, and at that point you are basically the authority in your home. And so when you see an evil happening, you have the ability, the executive power to put an end to that. Right? You've provided something for your family. I'll give you an example. You provided the TV. You gave them the TV. Okay? And you said, listen, we got the TV for entertainment purposes, perhaps some educational purposes, but there's some rules that come with this TV. And these are the rules. We can't watch these types of shows with this type of content. And then you might have other parameters like the TV turns off at a certain time of day. We're not going to be watching it all day long. You have other duties. When prayer time comes, we're not watching TV. When you have to go to school, or you have homework, or when it's bedtime, etc. There'd be a dozen different rules associated with the TV. And you as Sahib al-Bayt, you're the man of the house, or the woman in the house, you have the authority to now go, like if you're dealing with your kids, regardless of their age, doesn't matter 18 or not, they're there, they're under your rule. You say, TV off. If the TV doesn't turn off, if you were in somebody else's home, you might not be able to do anything about it. All you could do is say, look, it's prayer time, let's turn the TV off. Let's pray. And they're like, yeah, I'm not doing that. You go do what you want. Game's on. I got to watch the rest of the game. Well, we're going to miss prayer. Well, I'll just make it up later. No, haram alaik. Let's turn the TV off. Let's take a break and pray. No, you go ahead, man. I'm going to stay. It might not be your place to go turning the TV off, right? If you could, like if you knew you're in the position where, look, I'm in a house where if I do that, it's not going to cause a worse situation, and they're just going to go, okay, fine. Fine, we'll do it. At least they did it. All you want is the objective is to be, okay, fine. All right, great. Let's pray. Allahu Akbar. That's all you want. Prayer's done. Turn the TV back on, whatever. But at home, when you're your own home, it's, look, I don't need permission. I don't need to worry. My children might be upset, and that's just a part of the deal. They will be upset. You go turn the TV off. And then there might be, you started off, look, let's take a minute. You started off in the simple way, look, guys, 5 minutes, we're going to pray. Let's start getting ready. Turn the TV off. Let's get going. If there's a rejection, no, we're not doing it, then you start to escalate. Listen, if you don't turn it off, we're going to lose privileges. You have to escalate it further. Okay, guess what? TV's off. Remote's mine. Cord's mine. No more TV. And then you carry on as such. But when you're outside of your home, okay, you're out in public, you're at a restaurant or whatever, in our context, you say, hey, let's turn this stuff off because it's prayer time. You might not be praying, but we're going to pray. We don't want to hear all these TVs and all these things. Right? That's not your spot, not your place. You're not going to be able to enact anything that you're after here. Even if you're in a Muslim society, a Muslim country, you might be dealing with evils in your community that you yourself cannot put a stop to. You've exercised all possible scenarios within your power, and everything's failed, and now it may be that you need help, and you can report things to the authorities. And this is where you would get, where you would escalate this to someone else. You could escalate this to those who are responsible for managing such affairs out in society, like a ruler or like their deputy. This could be like the police or otherwise. So here he says basically at the end, fasdudi basically means to turn away from it. And this could refer to the matter, this could mean that he's referring the matter to someone with enforceable authority. This is, as mentioned by Imam as-Safarini, is less likely to be the correct interpretation here. The more plausible meaning of this last word is fasdud here is to repel and stop the evil with the help of the authorities, with the enforceable power. Whether that's the leader, the sultan, his representatives, the police, whatever it may be. So, as stated in al-Ādāb, in evil cases, if in the cases of evil, if it is stopped, then we're all good. But if not, it can be referred to the authorities from the onset, from the very beginning. And this is only in the event that you're confident that the ruler or the authorities will not act unjustly in the matter. All right, so if you're going to alert the authorities, you have to have a level of confidence that they're not going to abuse their power and overstep their response. Because within the Sharia, there's a framework that's utilized on how you deal with certain munkar. When you deal with evil. Right? So it could be that they're an abusive authority. They're an oppressive authority. And that if you get them involved, then the outcome would be much worse than what you're currently dealing with. All right, so that's something that has to be considered. Like, listen, if I call the police, in our legal code, the response is A. But in theirs, the response is B, which is much worse. The person could be fined. The person could be imprisoned. removed from their family, from their community, when in our scenario, that's not the case. And so when you see, like, look, this is going to be a huge overstep, then you wouldn't get them involved. Remember, we're not trying to create a worse scenario for our situation, right? This is when it would become a greater evil. And at that point, you just have to kind of wash your hands of the situation and say, I did my best, and we're going to have to leave it at that, even if it continues. Okay, so that's kind of the underlying rule that you have to think about when involving the authorities. And involving the authorities, it's discouraged to do so without need. The scholars of our tradition have made it clear that the condition referring a matter to the ruler is that one feels safe from his injustice, and that the motive is sincere counsel, not triumph or personal gain. Not that you just want to be the winner in the situation, so I'm going to call the police on you. I just want to be rid of you for my sake, though I'm not considering the outcome for you. Remember, that's not how we're considering ours. We're not that individualistic in Islam. As Muslims, we also consider other people. In Nihayat al-Mubtadi'een, Ibn Hamdani said that the ruler should only act in the manner in accordance with what is obligatory or recommended, and not beyond that, meaning when they're enforcing the law, they can only act in accordance with what's obligatory or recommended. They can't overstep their bounds. And the apparent meaning is that it is unlawful if the ruler commits something forbidden in response, like seizing wealth. This is considered impermissible, like punishing people through taking their wealth. And it's disliked if he does something that's disliked. The next line he says, إذا لم يخف في ذلك الأمر حيفه إذا كان ذا الإنكار حتم التأكد. If he fears no injustice in raising the issue, an objection is clearly required and sound. So this is kind of a continuation from the previous line here in regards to alerting the authorities. So he says, إذا لم يخف, if he fears no injustice, meaning one may refer the matter to the authority with executive power when the person making the referral does not fear the injustice. Here is في ذلك الأمر حيفه. Al-hayf here is the injustice of the ruler. So again, stressing the point, if you think alerting the authorities is going to bring about injustice, then you avoid it. And you just live on with it. You just live with it. Okay, so the pronouns refers to the ruler here, hayfahu, in this line of poetry. في ذلك الأمر hayfahu. The who here, wal-dhamir, is talking about wali al-amr. So if he fears the ruler's oppression, such as punishing the offender with more than what is deserved, again, taking money unjustly, then you should not report the matter to the authorities. The great Imam Ahmad stated explicitly in the narration that one should not report to the Sultan if the Sultan is likely to overstep in response. Al-Khalal, he said, Muhammad ibn Ashras informed me, a drunken man passed by us and cursed his Lord. So we sent someone to Abu Abdullah, that's Imam Ahmad, who was in hiding at the time. And we asked, what should we do in this case? We heard him curse his Lord. Do you think we should report him to the Sultan? He sent a message back saying, if the Sultan arrests him, I fear he may not apply the appropriate ruling. Instead, frighten him so that he flees as if escaping from you. They said, so we frightened him and he fled. Meaning Imam Ahmad, during that time, we understand the nature of what was happening in society among the ruling class. The rulers were very abusive, overstepping their bounds. That's when the mihna was going on. There was an inquisition of sorts about people's belief. And Imam Ahmad and many of the great imams and scholars were being imprisoned. They were being tested. They were being tortured. And so here's a scenario in which Imam Ahmad's noting this exact case. Someone is drunk and cursing Allah. So it's two. It's like, it's a strike and then kind of a strikeout. Right? I mean, it's just like, And so they want to escalate the issue. And he's like, look, you can't do that because the situation is such that they're not going to behave justly. So instead of going straight to the authorities, you can just threaten them. Look, we're going to take this to the authorities. You can threaten them. He's saying basically, like, scare the person, and perhaps they'll change, or they'll basically, in this case, they'll leave. Another condition here, he says, for it to be obligatory to report someone to the ruler, this is a second condition which must be met, is indicated in the following phrase: if the act is the act of condemnation, meaning the munkar, is obligatory, hatm. That is, that the matter being condemned must be something that is certainly forbidden, such as a clear prohibition or the abandonment of a clear obligatory duty. If the action left undone was merely something recommended, or the act committed was merely something disliked, then it's not to be reported to the ruler. So the apparent position of the scholars here from the general wording is that no distinction is made between individual obligations, fardu ayn or fardu kifayah. So whenever it is incumbent on a person to remove wrongdoing, he is unable to do so in himself, he must report it to the ruler. Again, that kind of gives you a conclusion as to the nature of the ruling here. Basically, it's saying that the end goal has to be achieved. And in order for you to fulfill the obligation, it may be that now you have to escalate it beyond yourself. So that it's not, you've done your duty. The fardu ayn now falls back to fardu kifayah, and you have to find someone that can jump in and help. And in this case, it may be that it's the ruler or his deputies. All right, so the next section here, we're going to look at some specific scenarios, which kind of give us a general concept as to just how far this thing goes. Okay, and this kind of debunks a lot of the common culture of today. So he says, وَلَا غُرْمَ فِي دُفِّ السُّنُوجِ أَكَسَرْتَهُ وَلَا سُورٍ أَيْضًا وَلَا آلَةِ الدَّدِ. No fine to pay, I changed the rule there, the wording there. No fine to pay for smashing tambourines, nor images, nor instruments of folly when found. So here, la ghurma, no fine to pay, meaning that you're not held financially responsible for destroying property. Fi duffis sunuji, some properties. Fi duffis sunuji kasartahu, for smashing tambourines. So basically, liability is waived for you breaking someone else's tambourine. And I use tambourine here because it's duff as sunuj. The duff is a drum. It's like a hand drum. And the sunuj are pairs of cymbals made of brass that strike each other. And if you know anything about percussion instruments, then you know that the tambourine, it's like a drum. There's a leather skin over it, around the rim. And around the rim, there are these little cymbals, typically 2 or more, that when you hit it, they strike and they make a jingling sound. Okay, so that's what he's talking about here. It refers to this drum with these cymbals of brass. It could also be bells or jingles. So if you break it, you have no penalty. You're not going to have to pay. You're not going to have to say, look, I broke it. It's your property. Now I need to give you the money for it. You're not liable for that because it's not permissible to use. Again, similar to cymbals, bells, etc. And this is Imam Ahmad's explicitly stated that one is not liable for breaking them. The plain drum without these cymbals or any other additions that make these chinging, clinking noises is permissible. And we've talked about this in the past in some detail. It's permissible for women to use outside of wedding celebrations. This is based on the report of a woman who vowed that if the Prophet returned safely, she would beat a drum over her head, and he said, fulfill your vow. However, this drum playing is disliked for men. Disliked, not haram. And they consider it to be disliked because it's the behavior of women. The women used to play the drums. Okay? And this was typical during weddings. Even though, as we understand, it's permissible for women to play on the drum outside of the wedding, it's recommended during the wedding for a woman to beat the drum. And this is based on the Prophet ﷺ saying the distinction between what is permissible and what is forbidden in marriage is the drum and the voice. So the women, they would play the drum and they would sing songs. Right? And this is not in front of everybody. This is among the women's party. Right? They weren't having mixed weddings. There would be a women's gathering and celebration where they would play the drum and they would sing. And this is untrained, by the way. This wasn't considered like an art form where people would study and they would go to class for and they'd hold lessons for and there'd be a teacher. And this was just like, you just kind of pick it up through cultural practice and festivals, etc., like weddings and different events. You pick up this, and then some would have a natural kind of like gift that they could sing, and they weren't trained. Okay, that's not like an art form in Islam. Islamic arts don't include music, musical instruments, and singing. The Islamic arts are things like architecture or like calligraphy. We might even say recitation of the Quran could be considered artistic expression. Okay? But this is very different. This is something that's just a cultural practice that people just pick up, and it's typically done by women and recommended during weddings. There are other occasions in which it's not disliked for the drum to be used, like when a traveler returns home. Like when somebody comes back, and this is indicated as the Prophet ﷺ returning from a journey to celebrate their arrival. It's like a welcoming party, okay? Or on the circumcision of a child. Also a moment of celebration. It's recommended that you could play this drum. Okay, so that gives you some, some specific rulings here. The other thing he mentions is nor images in this line here. From smashing tambourines, the next one says nor images. Images here, meaning here in the context of this verse, you're not financially responsible or liable for destroying an image. Just as you're not liable for breaking the tambourine. And we should understand that there's a severe warning that has been numerous warnings that have come from the Prophet ﷺ concerning the great sin of image making. One of them is found in Sahih Bukhari and Muslim. This is from Aisha radiallahu anha. She said the Prophet ﷺ returned from a journey, and I had covered an alcove with a curtain that had images on it. It was like a little recess. Some have described this as like, maybe it's like a little storage closet or area, or it's like a little shelf that you put things on that's kind of recessed into the wall. And so she put a curtain over it, kind of like we would with a door or something. She put a curtain over there. You got to decorate the place. And on the curtain, there were images. And so when the Prophet ﷺ returned and he saw it, she said his face changed color. And that's described at times when he would get upset. He would be visibly upset so that you could see that he was getting a color in his face. And he said, "O Aisha, the people who will receive the most severe punishment on the day of resurrection are those who imitate the creation of Allah." So here's a moment where the Prophet ﷺ was being pretty stern, right? There was no, "Sweetheart, if you don't mind, and I'm sorry for saying this, let me give you a gift first." And no, the Prophet ﷺ went straight for it because the nature of the infraction required serious, immediate correction. And of course, he's talking to Aisha radiallahu anha. He's not talking to another person. This is al-Mu'mineen. Right? This is the mother of the believers, a very pious woman. She's not going to give any reaction to this. She's going to accept from the Prophet ﷺ. At least that's what was typical of her. And so she said, we tore it up and we made it into one or two cushions. Okay, so that's one hadith. There are numerous other hadith regarding images and the nature of the torment for those that make images. And this could be a two-dimensional image, like a drawing or a painting. Or this could be a three-dimensional image, which could be much worse, or it's a figurine of sorts. Okay? So both of those fall into the category of image making here. And the prohibition of images, also the images, these types of images, are what prevent angels from entering into the home. And there is some debate about like to what extent the angels, which angels don't come into the home, such that, you know, they're all angels that are recording our deeds. Do they not come in the home as well? Or is it just other angels that perhaps are bringing barakah or something of that nature? And it applies only to images that have a soul, like humans or animals, that are intact, the image meaning an intact being, such that the manner in which they're depicted, they would be alive and living. So if, for example, it was just a head, well, the living being doesn't live without the body. All right, so that falls outside of this category. So if the head was severed or detached, or the majority of the body wasn't present with the image, or if it was just a body of something that wouldn't live in that condition, then that's not what we're discussing here. That's not the prohibited type of image. The image is that which has a soul. That would be basically you're imitating a living being with a soul, or with a life, like an animal. This also excludes inanimate objects like trees, nature scenes, symbols, etc. Those things are all permissible to make images of or to display. What we're looking at here, or also, as I mentioned, partial or distorted images that cannot sustain life. And it's also important to note that what everyone agrees on is the handcrafted imagery, whether that's a drawing by hand, painting by hand, or a three-dimensional sculpture by hand. And there's a debate as to whether this also includes photography, which is like, it's in our lives. So among the Hanabila of the era in which photography was present, they came to the conclusion that photography is excluded in this prohibition because you're not creating the image. You're capturing what Allah created. Like if you drew something, it's you creating that thing. But through the camera, through the photograph, you're capturing what's already been created by Allah, as if you were looking in a mirror or a reflecting pool. And the images that are in a mirror or a reflecting pool are not prohibited. Right, so that's kind of some of the scholarly thought and reflection on photography as it relates to image making. And then there are others that just say any type of image that's captured or that's created, everything is in one category. Me personally, I don't particularly like that, like everything's in one thing. I'm more inclined towards the more rational, I guess, scholarly approach of determining the difference between the two based on the nature of the hadith. Because there are other hadith that talk about a person who's trying to essentially compete with Allah's creation and will be commanded to bring that thing to life. And we also have to remember the context of the situation in which they were living at the time is they were constructing three-dimensional idols, or they were having two-dimensional paintings of idols and gods that they would worship. Okay? So the issue was one of seriousness, especially living in an environment that they were just coming out of, or they were immediately impacted by idolatry. So here, the author, al-Ādāb, his general wording seems to allow destroying any image on anything. However, it is restricted in terms of the liability here. It is restricted to defacing images on walls. That you will not be liable for defacing an image on a wall. Like if you went and rubbed out the image on the wall. Or if you removed something on the wall such that the image had been defaced or it had been altered such that it was no longer impermissible. But it's not permissible to destroy garments or curtains that bear images. Even though image making is forbidden, you can't destroy these things without being liable for them because they can be repurposed. They're property that can be repurposed and utilized. So you couldn't take somebody's stuff and then burn it or shred it up, because they could potentially take that item, it is part of their wealth, and they could reutilize it for something else permissible, much like we find in the hadith, in which she took the curtain down and then turned it into pillows. So it can be repurposed. So these images that are on these types of materials, clothing, or decorations, they can be used for things to be sat on, even without defacing the image. You could turn it into a rug or a pillow that you sit on. And when you sit on something, you're not honoring it and putting it on the wall or displaying it. Now it's being debased and made lowly by you stepping on it or sitting on it. And if this is the case, this is when they say it's permissible. These things become permissible as cushions or as rugs. They're no longer prohibited when they're utilized in this fashion. The next part of the line, it says, nor instruments of folly when found. Instruments of folly here, or play. Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah ta'ala said, it is not permissible to own or rent out instruments of amusement according to the four imams. In al-Iqna', like other works of the madhab, it states that whoever destroys or breaks a flute, we're talking about musical instruments now, or a lute, it's another musical instrument, a cross, or a vessel of gold or silver, or a container holding wine that one is ordered to pour out, even if he could have poured it out without breaking the container, or an instrument of amusement, even if it is with a child, such as a tambourine with cymbals, or a backgammon set, or a chessboard, or puppet figures, or idols. Some of these things are mentioned by the poet. They're not liable for any of them according to the relied upon opinion. So here, musical instruments and certain items of frivolity, those that have been prohibited, if you break them and destroy them, you're not held liable for that. And the next part he says, وَآلَةِ تَنْجِيمٍ وَآلَةِ تَنْجِيمٍ وَسِحْرٍ وَنَحْوِهِ وَكُتُبٍ حَوَتْ هَذَا وَأَشْبَاهَهُ أُقْدُدِي. Says, nor the tools of astrology, spells, and such tear the books that teach it and all of its kind. So nor the tools of astrology, here meaning that you will not be held liable for destroying the instruments of astrology, alat tanjim, because tanjim is a false discipline. It's based on guesswork and estimation. It's not knowledge, nor is there any certainty of it involved, and it's not based in the Sharia. And so those who engage in it, essentially, they have no basis in their religion. They're not from the people of the religion that engage in tanjim. This is astrology. It's the best way to say it today, astrology. Shaykh al-Islam, he said, astrology is when you draw conclusions about earthly events based on celestial conditions. It's considered to be a branch of sihr. And he said it is categorically haram by consensus. Astrology, in al-Iqna', it reads that what is forbidden from the science of astrology is what we have just mentioned, namely the claims of its practitioners make, the claims they make of being able to know future events in the coming times, such as rainfall, snowfall, windstorms, price fluctuations, and the like. They assert that they discern such things based on the movement of the stars, their conjunctions and separations, and their appearance in particular seasons. Yet all of this belongs to knowledge that Allah alone possesses. No one else knows it but Him. So, like today's astrology, you know, your horoscopes and stuff, they even publish those in the paper. I mean, some of this stuff is like ubiquitous. It's just everywhere. Astrology, you go in, you read the paper, it says, you're going to find love today. And I'm like, you're going to get a new job today. Your life is going to change. You're a Gemini. Your life is going to change for the better. Or there are people that are much more, that's like, you know, I mean, that's like pretty much like a generic type of astrology. But then there are those that are actually like really, they get down deep into it. And it's almost like a religion for them. Based on the celestial bodies, they make decisions in their life based on the stars and such, where they are. Well, I can't do this today. This month I can't be doing this stuff because I'm a such and such based on my constellation, my birth constellation. So I can't be doing this with this type of, I can't be doing this activity right now. Or even some like price fluctuation. I can't travel right now, or price fluctuation. I can't be getting involved in the marketplace right now. There's going to be a dip or whatever. That stuff is still happening today. Right, so here there's tools and things that they use. So in the event that you were to break them or destroy them, you wouldn't be held liable. Basically, they can't say, look, that cost money. You don't go pay for that. I'm not paying for that stuff. That was something that was sinful to begin with. It's not a legitimate item of property that's protected under the Islamic law. In fact, it needs to be destroyed and done away with. Okay, so that's based on, of course, the Imam is here is giving us general ruling here, but we can see within the relied upon view of the legal code and the Hanbalī tradition, you will not be penalized financially for destroying such things. Also, he says, and there's no liability when it comes to destroying instruments of sorcery. This is sihr. We're not talking about stage magic. Stage magic is like sleight of hand. Stage magic is where you're going like this. You know, like. Unless I led you to believe something false, that I could heal you or have some powers, you know, like like I have, unless I was like healing you, or I had the power to heal, or I could disconnect I actually was alluding to some type of false belief, then these types of sleight of hand things are different than sihr. Okay? Even the sleight of hand things, because it's deceptive, it should be avoided, but it's not the same thing as sihr. Okay, they're two different things. One's a form of deception, and one's a form of like actual sorcery. Okay, it's categorically considered to be one of the gravest major sins, sihr. There's no liability in destroying instruments of its kind, meaning anything similar to sorcery, such as incantations, whether they're using pebbles for these purposes. All these things follow under the same ruling. And engaging in such practice is considered speaking about Allah without knowledge, and who is more unjust than those who fabricate lies about Allah. You find in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا يُعَلِّمَانِ مِنْ أَحَدٍ حَتَّى يَقُولَ إِنَّمَا نَحْنُ فِتْنَةٌ فَلَا تَكْفُرْ. They would not teach anyone until they had said, we are only a trial, so do not disbelieve. And this verse, so do not disbelieve, this part, فَلَا تَكْفُرْ, and this is talking about the teaching of sihr, do not disbelieve, serves as an evidence that the sorcerer, the sahir, is a kafir, is a disbeliever. And this is the explicit position of Imam Ahmad radiallahu anhu. It's the relied upon position in the Hanbalī school that the sorcerer is a disbeliever. In al-Iqna' it states that learning, teaching, and practicing sorcery is forbidden. Sorcery consists of knots, incantations, and words spoken, written, or actions performed that affect the body, heart, or mind of the victim without physical contact. And so, these books should be destroyed, or these materials, as he says, tear the books that teach it and all of its kind. There'd be no liability on you for destroying the books that contain this type of prohibited content. Whether that is all the things that we previously mentioned, sorcery, astrology, musical books, etc. If you were to destroy all those, basically rip them, shred them, burn them, however you get rid of them, then you wouldn't be held liable for the value of that property. You would be doing all of us a great service. So in the verse here, in this line of poetry, when he says, وَكُتُبٍ حَوَتْ هَذَا, هذا here meaning this pronoun, or I should say this اسم إشارة. حوت هذا وأشباهه here is referring back to the instruments of astrology, sorcerer, and all of their types. This is essentially what's meant by the author when he also says all of the various different kinds, anything that's similar to this. And this also includes other material that can be heretical or misleading, like books of fabricated hadith. Not weak hadith. Weak hadith are usable. We take weak hadith in many instances based on certain conditions. Fabricated hadith, however, like they have no asl, there's no origin to these hadith, they're lies essentially, then those books are to be destroyed. Or books of the disbelievers. And we're not talking about books of the disbelievers that are truthful, we're talking about books of disbelief of the disbelievers. Then those books you get rid of. They're teaching you how to worship the devil, for example. They're teaching you about doubts in your religion, for example. You don't go picking up that stuff and reading through it and then having a respect and honor for it just because it's in word form in a book. Right? Those things are all to be to be purged from the society. They lead people astray and cause doubts, lead people to sin and perhaps even disbelief, which would be even greater, a great tribulation. The next line he says, وَبَيْضٍ وَجَوْزٍ لِلْقِمَارِ بِقَدْرِ مَا يُزِيلُ عَنِ الْمَنْكُورِ مَقْصِدَ مُفْسِدِ. He says, nor eggs nor nuts used for gambling play that removes the evil from a corrupter's design. So here, nor eggs nor nuts, he's talking about items that if you destroy as well, you will not be held liable for. The egg and the nut, they were used for gambling. Whether a part of a game, or like you would have today various different games where they're using like pebbles or little discs or dice or things of that nature. And you might even have other things that you might have chips that are involved. Chips for gambling purposes. You put them in the pot and they represent something in the process of gambling. So to destroy all of that would not be something you'd be held liable for. And gambling, of course, as we should understand in Islam, is impermissible. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا إِنَّمَا الْخَمْرُ وَالْمَيْسِرُ وَالْأَنصَابُ وَالْأَزْلَامُ رِجْسٌ مِّنْ عَمَلِ الشَّيْطَانِ فَاجْتَنِبُوهُ لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ إِنَّمَا يُرِيدُ الشَّيْطَانُ أَنْ يُوقِعَ بَيْنَكُمُ الْعَدَاوَةَ وَالْبَغْضَاءَ فِي الْخَمْرِ وَالْمَيْسِرِ وَيَصُدَّكُمْ عَنْ ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ وَعَنِ الصَّلَاةِ فَهَلْ أَنْتُمْ مُنْتَهُونَ. O you who believe, indeed wine, intoxicants in general, gambling, al-maysir, this is gambling. Stone altars and divining arrows are all filth. They're najis from the handiwork of shaitan, so avoid them that you may succeed. Shaitan only seeks to sow enmity and hatred among you through intoxicants and gambling, and to hinder you from the remembrance of Allah and from prayer, so will you not desist. This is in Surah Al-Ma'idah, verse number 90 to 91. So al-maysir here refers to gambling in all of its forms, whether that be with dice, whether it be gambling with chess, with beads, with bones, with walnuts, eggs, pebbles, anything, any of these things that are utilized in the process of gambling. Gambling in general falls under the category of devouring wealth unjustly. And Allah says, وَلَا تَأْكُلُوا أَمْوَالَكُمْ بَيْنَكُمْ بِالْبَاطِلِ. Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 188. Do not consume one another's wealth unjustly. And so this is considered to be a major sin, gambling. This is explicitly mentioned in these verses. It's very clear evidence that it's a major sin. And among the evidences of this ruling, that you cannot, among them, from not consuming the wealth of others unjustly, is the punishment associated with it. And that's how we can arrive to the conclusion that it's a major sin. The Prophet ﷺ says, كُلُّ جَسَدٍ نَبَتَ مِنْ سُحْتٍ فَالنَّارُ أَوْلَى بِهِ. That every body that has been nourished by illicit gain, the fire is more deserving of it. Okay, so here you can see an attached punishment or a threat of a punishment. Hell is attached to this type of gain. So according to the official position of the school, and this is explicitly mentioned by Imam Ahmad, a major sin is that which has a legal punishment associated with in this life or a threat in the hereafter. If there's a legal punishment for it here in this life, meaning if you do it, like, for example, theft. to a certain amount in certain circumstances, that it could mean severing your hands, or it could be lashes, okay, or something of that nature. If there's a punishment, then that's considered a major sin. If there's a threat in the hereafter, there might not be a punishment in this life. There's a threat in the hereafter, that's also considered a major sin. And so when it comes to the destruction of these properties, there's no liability. But the destruction of these properties is only to be done to the amount necessary to eliminate the wrongdoing, to stop it from being utilized in that fashion. So only as much damage should be inflicted or incurred based on the necessity. That way you could remove the corrupt purpose from gambling in that person's circumstances or situation. You don't want to be excessive and exceed the bounds. Then you could potentially be liable, destroying something unnecessarily. And this same thing applies to vessels of gold and silver or objects used in similar fashions. The next line says, وَلَا شَقِّ أَزِقِ الْخَمْرِ أَوْ كَسْرِ دَنِّهِ إِذَا عَجَزَ الْإِنْكَارُ دُونَ التَّقَدُّدِ. Says, so no tearing the wineskin or smashing its jug if rebuking is impossible without a damaging blow. Okay, there's no liability for tearing a wineskin. That's riq al-khamr. Like, so they used to keep the wine in skins, or there would be a container. O kasri dennihi. The den here is the container, is the jug. And the word ziq, as I mentioned, or it's also with a fatha ziq, is the hide of an animal that they would have tanned, and then they would have used to keep the liquids inside of it. Something that you might see on the movies today. All right? And of course, here the khamr is not specifically just a particular wine type. It's anything that's intoxicating that obscures the intellect. Anything or covers or veils the intellect. And we should understand from that whether this is a large quantity of intoxicant or a small quantity. It's all prohibited. Drinking or consuming such intoxicants is also a major sin. The Prophet ﷺ, he says, لا يشرب الخمر حين يشربها وهو مؤمن. The one who drinks intoxicants while drinking them is not a believer at that moment. This is found in Sahih al-Bukhari, Muslim. ولكن التوبة معروضة بعد. Tawbah, repentance, however, it remains open thereafter. The Prophet ﷺ also says, لعن الله الخمر وشاربها وساقيها ومبتاعها وبائعها وعاصرها ومعتصرها وحاملها والمحمولة إليه. So Allah has cursed wine. Its drinker, its server, its buyer, its seller, its presser, the one that squeezes the grapes or whatever, the one for whom it is being pressed, its carrier, and the one to whom it is carried. And this is also, and this is narrated in Sunan Abi Dawood, and there's also another wording in Sunan Ibn Majah, وَآكِلَ ثَمَنِهَا, and the one who consumes its price. So you didn't do any of those previous things, but now you're benefiting from the money that was made from it. You might not even have sold it, but you're a recipient of that wealth. And the basis for tearing wineskins, the destruction of these properties, is found in the life of the Prophet ﷺ. Abdullah ibn Umar, he said, the Prophet ﷺ commanded me to bring him a blade, like a knife. I brought it to him, and he sent it to be sharpened. Then he gave it to me and said, bring it to me in the morning. And I did so. And we went out with his companions to the markets of Medina, where there were skins of wine that had been imported from Sham. He took the blade from me and tore open all of the wineskins that were present in his sight. He went into the market and he just started destroying ripping open all of these skins so that it would all pour onto the ground. And then he gave me the blade back and commanded his companions come with me and assist me, such that we would go throughout all of the market, because he just did what was visible right there, basically showing them. And said that we go and we don't leave a wineskin that's not to be torn. Right? So they went, he said, and I did not leave a single wineskin in the market without tearing it. This is found in Musnad Imam Ahmad. He says, وَإِنْ يَتَأَتَّى دُونَهُ رَفُ مُنْكَرٍ ضَمِنْتَ الَّذِي يُنْقَى بِتَغْسِيلِهِ قَدِي. So this is the last line that we're looking at this evening. He says here, but if without it the evil could be removed, what is purified through washing is all that you owe. So the Nazim here, the poet, he says essentially that if condemnation is possible, if the raf al-munkar, removing the evil is possible without, he says here, dunahu, وَإِنْ يَتَأَتَّى دُونَهُ. Basically, if it's possible without destruction, and you can remove the munkar, then you'll be liable for what could have been purified through cleansing, and only that. Namely, like, if you're going to deal with alcohol in jugs or in vats or whatever it may be, and you don't have to destroy that container, you can just simply spill it out, because the container, if it could be purified, could be used for something else. If you could purify that, then it could be used for something else. So he's saying in this case, you would only be liable for the container in the event that you could have poured it out and saved the container, and it could be purified such that they could use it. There may be a container which couldn't be purified because the alcohol, the najasa has been absorbed into the container. And when it becomes absorbed into something, the najasa can't be removed at that point. So in the event that it's not absorbed into the container, you can just simply pour it and then wash it out, going through the process of cleaning najasa. Then, and you broke it, then the author is saying, in that case, you are liable. You're liable for the property here. So the Imam here, the author, has mentioned about this liability. He says, essentially, this is a particular view based on narrations that the author adopted. These narrations are transmitted in al-Insaf and al-Furu', other works, from the narration of al-Athram from Imam Ahmad. However, the relied upon view in the madhab differs. Imam al-Mardawi said in al-Insaf, he says the same book in which that narration was mentioned, because in al-Insaf, the author al-Mardawi, he brings multiple narrations for one particular issue. He'll bring the different views that are there, and then a conclusion will be produced. He says there's no liability regardless of whether one could have poured it out without damaging the container or not. So that's the official position of the madhab, is that, look, if you could still save the container, all you had to do was pour it out, and you decided instead, I'm not going to save the container, I'm just going to break it. Like, I could pour it out and they'd have the container and the evil would be removed, but I'm not going to go through that process. I'm just going to break the thing and it's going to be poured out and the container's lost as well. I'm not held liable. Based on the current usage of it, it's impermissible. Cracking it open, donezo. No problem. And then he said, and this is the official position of the madhab, it was reported by al-Marwazi, preferred in al-Furu' and affirmed in al-Iqna', al-Muntaha, and elsewhere, and is among the unique positions of the madhab. This is min mufradat al-madhab. This particular view that you're not held liable. All right? So that's where we're going to wrap it up for now, in time for the adhan. Jazakallah khair. Wa sallallahu wa sallam ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa akhiru da'wana. Alhamdulillah.